Welcome to Trailblazers and Titans with your host, Dr. Keith Haney. Trailblazers and Titans is your go-to podcast for insights, inspiration, and actionable advice from the world's most successful entrepreneurs and leaders. Each episode features in-depth interviews with industry pioneers, innovative thinkers, and business moguls who share their journeys, challenges, and strategies for success. Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned leader, or someone looking to make a significant impact, this podcast provides the tools and motivation to blaze your trail and become a titan in your field. Tune in to learn, grow, and transform your vision into reality.
It's the space where we explore big ideas, bold innovation, and the stories that help create deeper understanding in a rapidly changing world. I am your host, Keith Haney. Today's guest is someone whose work fundamentally changes how we view leadership, strategy, and the very nature of organizations. Norman Wolfe is a founder and CEO of Quantum Leaders and the creator of the Living Organization, a framework that integrates business outcomes with human development to create sustainable, soul-centered growth. With over 35 years of advising CEOs and executive teams, Norman is a master of helping leaders see organizations not as machines to be engineered, but as living systems to be nurtured. His insights come from decades of leadership experience, including his time at Hewlett-Packard, where he led major turnarounds and drove transformational change. He has also served on several boards, including National Technical Systems. He is the author of a game-changing book, The Living Organization, Transforming Business to Create Extraordinary Results. And today he's going to share his wisdom behind his model, the philosophy that drives it, and how leaders can rethink their very DNA of their organizations. Norman, welcome to the podcast.
Keith, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you for that lovely introduction.
Well, yeah, no, I'm very impressed. And you're right up my alley. I just did a dissertation on organizational change, so I'm looking forward to this conversation. So I could have used you in my dissertation chair. So, Norman, I'm going to ask you my favorite question. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Wow. This might sound trite, but it has a lot of depth to me. Follow your heart.
Okay.
Over the course of my life, both from a personal as well as a very professional business point of view, there is great wisdom to what I call the heart center or heart-centered wisdom. And it puts the very active, challenging mind into perspective. It allows us to use the mind for what it's intended for, which is to help manifest what the heart wants. And so, yeah, I find following the heart is probably the best wisdom I've ever followed.
I love that. That is great.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask you because I really want to get into what your work is because it's so interesting to me. You've spent decades working with world leaders, strategy, transformation. What's first sparked the idea that organizations aren't machines but living systems?
Well, I was unconscious about it for a long time in terms of, that's always the way I felt about organizations. But around 2002, I was talking to one of my clients and I asked him, why do you always hire me as a client? And he said, because you help me execute faster. So yeah, that made sense to me. That's what I was always interested in, whether when I was a leader at HP or in other positions afterwards or helping leaders. Leaders have a responsibility to ensure the organizations perform in a way that produces the results necessary for sustainable growth. That's the fundamental role of a leader. And so helping leaders fulfill that responsibility was always what was important to me, which is a fancy way of saying we have to execute on our strategy. We have to create what we say we want to create. As I began to focus my consulting really now more explicitly on strategy execution, I began to discover that there have been a number of studies done over the years that indicate only 30% of companies actually succeed at executing strategy. In other words, 70% fail. I was at a conference and somebody asked me, what do I do? And I told them, and she asked me, what makes you different than any other consultant? And I said, I think it's because I look at organizations differently. I see them as living entities. They have a soul, they have a purpose, they have a reason for existing. They're just like people. And making that statement obviously became the catalyst. What those two things brought to my mind was, if 70% of executions fail, in the context of all the wisdom we have in terms of, I mean, you wrote your doctoral thesis on organizational effectiveness and leadership, and there's no end of wisdom on what we need to do. And leaders aren't dumb; they're very smart, they're very committed, they're very caring. Um, so why aren't we moving the needle? Why has it been 70% for over 3-4 decades now? And that's when I concluded that the problem is we're stuck in the paradigm trap. We have a way of thinking of an organization, and that way is thinking of it as a machine that needs to be optimized, made efficient in the process of converting inputs to outputs. And with that way of looking at the challenges, it leads me to make decisions a certain way, which is actually undermining our ability. So I shifted. I started to think about, okay, if an organization is a person, if it operates like an individual, then the question really is it not how do I optimize the machine, but how do I help this living person get more effective at creating the outputs or the results they want? That changes everything. Now,
That's great.
I mean, it just changes the way we frame the challenges, what my role as leader is, how I go about achieving those results, and I'm sure we'll get into more of the details. But that was the catalyst, that um, disconnect between what we know to do and the reason we're not doing it, and the realization that we're stuck in a paradigm trap. We're stuck in a belief system that's undermining us.
What's funny about as I hear you talking about that, I'm thinking about, because my dissertation was really about how you do that in a church setting. Um, and what was interesting is it just hit me as you said that Jesus gave us a perfect illustration to talk about the church as a body of Christ. It talked about it as a living
That's right.
organization,
You
and we
did.
all can't be eyes, we all can't be ears. And you just also kind of described that that business have to think that same way too. These are all parts of a body, parts of a living, growing
That's
organization.
exactly right.
So as you think about that, I want to get into this idea that so many times we think about business, we think of it as a thing, not a person. And how is growth really kind of impossible without understanding the need to do human development in the organization?
Well, yeah, that's a really good point because what we have again in the machine paradigm. So this, I'll keep referring to the machine paradigm as just the way we think about how we proceed to achieve our goals, right? And in that paradigm, in that way of thinking, we have separated, we have bifurcated the role and responsibility, the focus, the challenges around how do we create results versus how do we develop our people. You see, you got business consultants and you got organization development consultants, right? You've got you've got process reengineering, strategy development, KPIs, goal setting, dashboards over here in the business side of house, and you've got the soft side, culture and leadership, and you know, and literally we break it up that way. In fact, the responsibility for results is the role of leader. Responsibility for people, well, HR will take care of that, right? I mean, you can see it how we think, and as you're were alluding to, that's really ridiculous. At the end of the day, the only way things get done is by people doing them. And people are not just simply component parts of a machine. They're living, breathing, emotional, relational, creative beings. That's the essence of people. And the other principle, one of the key principles that I discovered is the interesting notion that when a group of people come together for a common purpose, they literally create a collective persona. They create an identity. My sales team has a different set of identity than my finance team or my engineering team. And the people within become identified with and therefore part of a living entity called the sales team or the finance team. The company itself collectively has its own personality. IBM is very different than Microsoft, right? Coke is very different than Amazon. And it's not just what they do, their whole personality, their persona is very different. And how people within those organizations were very different. My life at Pratt& and Whitney Aircraft, a very aerospace-oriented, structural, engineering-minded organization, very different than HP, also engineering-minded, but very different culture, you might say, more like different personas. And my behaviors changed. The minute I went from one organization to the other, I started to unconsciously adapt the behaviors of the collective I was in. That's part of what we do. So the notion that an organization is a person starts to rethink about how does a person create outcomes? And with people, we do stuff to get things done. Obviously, our activity is important. But relationships are very important to us as people. Yeah. And so the quality and nature of my relationships will impact my activity. Simply put, I get up in the morning, I'm feeling good. Something happens, I get into conflict with my wife. Oh, it's really a bad fight. And I go to work. That energy of that conflict in my relationship at home is carrying forward into my life. I remember early in my career, one of my supervisors said, Norman, when you come to work, you live your personal life at the door. I was like, huh? How do I do that? How do I leave what part of me do I leave to where I take off? Is it my right arm? I mean, it's silly, right?
Right.
But if I'm a component, that makes sense. If I'm a person, it doesn't. So activity and relationships, not only outside relationships, but obviously relationships within my team, relationships with my team, with other teams. Very important to how I will produce, how I will do my activity. The third element that is very unique to humans, even different than other living systems in nature, is we are story-making entities. We create meaning in life by the stories we tell. I just read a passage in the New Testament. I think it came from Mark. There was a parable, and Jesus's comment was something around that same notion. It's the stories we tell that create our sense of reality. And so, activity, relationship, and context are three elements of leading a person to create better results, where activity is the only thing I care about in the machine.
Makes sense.
That's the framework of the living organization framework, or that's the foundational piece of the living organization framework.
So, for the leader hearing our discussion, I'm curious who's now adopted the living organizational mindset. What does it look like, their decision making? How does that change? Different from the person who sees it as a organization, a mechanical organization that's non-living, compared to the one who sees it as a living. Tell me some decision making
Yeah.
changes in their
So
mindset.
going back to one thing you implied earlier, the way I like to say it is in the machine paradigm, I look at my people as a resource to get results. But when I think of it from a living organization perspective, I know that if I can develop the capability and maturity of the people, maturity becomes a key element, obviously, when you're dealing with humans. If I can develop the capability and maturity of the people, I increase the capacity of the organization to perform more. Makes sense. So instead of using people to get results, why don't we use the results as the catalyst, the challenge of getting the results as the catalyst for developing the people? So I changed my orientation. It's not like my job is to set the goals, set the strategy, establish the KPIs, and say, here's what you have to do, and I'm going to evaluate you on it. It's like, here's our strategy. Here's what we have to do. How can I help you be more successful at doing that? Not a lot of difference in the doing, but a very difference in the framing, a different energy about it, a different relationship about it. Um, so that's just one aspect. Another aspect is we begin to think of the organization not as thousands of people, but as um, specific living entities. Like I have my salesperson. Right? By salesperson, I mean the whole collective of the sales team. And I can ask the question, what is their collective all about? How are they being as a collective? And how do I have to align that collective with our strategy? It takes the pressure off of me of having to think about how do I align 100 people to our strategy. I just have to deal with one person, that collective called the salesperson or the engineering department. So it changes the way I think about how I align and get the organization committed in taking ownership for our strategy. Another element is um, in the traditional way, as I said, the leadership team will develop the strategy, figure out what the goals are, what the metrics are, and then pass them on down to the organization. And they look for buy-in, right? They look to get alignment and buy-in. In our model, I don't want just buy-in. I want ownership. I want people committed. I want them engaged. Well, if I want them engaged, I've got to be able to allow them to choose. Okay? If they don't choose, they're really being nothing more than a victim, if you will, or a recipient of somebody else's ideas. And they're never going to own that. If I came to you and I said, Keith, you know, here's what you're going to do for a living, and I'm going to evaluate how good you are. That's a whole different conversation than if I said, Keith, here's what we need to accomplish together. How can you contribute? What would you like to contribute? Now, of course, there are boundaries. You can't say, well, gee, I'd like to learn to fly helicopters. Well, we're not in the helicopter business. So,
Right.
sorry, that's not one of the options. But I can help you find a new company if that's really what you want to do. But the conversation changes. And now, so we call it contribution agreements. I want you to tell me how you want to and feel engaged. And what's going to empower you to contribute to your fullest? And then how can I help you develop so that you can do that? It's very different conversations we're having now as leaders. So those are just a few examples of what changes when you adapt this living organization framework mindset.
You've been doing this work for decades.
Decades.
What trends are you seeing today that make this model even more relevant and for the future of the work that you're doing?
Well, you're right. I've been doing this for decades. As I said, it was early 2000. I've been working with clients for well over 35 years. So, a couple of things I see. One is, uh, as a friend of mine said, Norman, the world's finally catching up to you. So that's the good news. uh, Being a pioneer, you wonder whether the rig and trade's ever going to follow you along, but it's catching up. And I do see that. I see there's a stronger interest in recognizing that the old patterns are not working. We don't need more tools. We don't need more new creative repackaging of everything we've already done. We need a whole new mindset. And more people are seeing that. So that's the good news. The other thing is, I think the environment we're in has been for a while, but is increasingly more complex and more chaotic. And um, and that's putting greater demands on leaders to um, address a world that is uncertain, chaotic. Most of my clients for the last year have been, especially the last year, have been dealing with so much uncertainty. They don't know uh, what the tariffs are going to impact. Are there going to be tariffs? What's the marketplace going to do? How are the customers going to respond? Are they economically good? Yeah, I mean, there's just so much uncertainty out there. Um, they can't use the old models for planning and establishing plans. They need an organization that's much more resilient, much more fluid, much more responsive to changing demands of an organization. And that requires an organization that's much more mature. With maturity, we learn the art and skill of dealing with life however it shows up without getting thrown off. Right. That's one of the benefits of maturity. Having been around a while, I can tell you that's one of the benefits. uh, but that's what we need from our organization. So I see the changing world is actually going to force leaders to rethink what they've been trained over the years to do. And it's not that it's wrong, it's just not sufficient for today's world. Um,
Well, that's good. In your work, you challenge leaders to see people, to redefine how they see people. And I know for those who are trying to wrap their minds around this shift of a living organization, what change would you say leaders need to make today to embrace, to really get this mindset?
um, I would say that probably the biggest thing is, actually, I was talking to a client yesterday about this very thing. They have to see people as inherently good and wanting to make a contribution. I think they also have to recognize that while that is true, employees overall, people in general, have been trained to be highly dependent on leaders to make decisions for them. Society overall I mean, our education system, uh, even universities. I remember early in my career, universities were about creating um, critical thinking skills in people. And over the decades, I've watched them evolve to creating technicians, people who can have certain skills that are marketable, right? That's not what universities used to be about. So we've trained people over the years to really be dependent on leaders to make decisions for them. And so I think one of the skills leaders really need to focus on is how can I, as a leader, take a group of people that aren't geared towards, have been conditioned, if you will, to be followers, and have them be co-creators together as a single unit, like starlings who move in lockstep with each other intuitively, in with passion to achieve the goals of the organization. I think it's a major retraining, um, and a lot of it is maturing. It goes back to that notion of we have to recognize as leaders, we have to add the element of maturity to capabilities to really be successful.
So in my study, I studied different types of leadership and figured out if one leadership style was more conducive or successful at change than others. I'm curious, with all your 35 years plus of working with leaders, is there a leadership style that you've discovered struggles with this more than others?
Yes, leadership styles that are very, what you might call the heroic leadership. The person who feels compelled to be uh, the guiding leader, the guiding light, um, will struggle with this a lot. Um, leaders like Hubert Joly, who was the former CEO of Best Buy and was responsible for Best Buy's turnaround. He wrote a book called The Heart of the Company. I think that's it. Something along those lines. Um, and he speaks about leadership as being in my language, a heart-centered journey. You've got to be able to connect authentically with the people. If you're going to challenge them to become more mature, they have to feel a sense of caring, compassion, even love for them as a human, not for them as a component. And that's going to challenge a lot of leaders to step into that. I will tell you that those leaders I've worked with and I've trained how to go into the heart center and how to communicate from the heart center, how to relate to people from this place of love and caring and compassion and empathy, um, find their lives actually so much easier because the people are joining them in their journey to create the results they need. They've taken away the burden of having to be the all-knowing, all-powerful, heroic leader that so many leaders think they have to be.
I'm glad you mentioned it because I was going to ask you this question. You kind of led right into it beautifully. So many leaders are exhausted and overwhelmed. How can your model help them lead with more clarity, purpose, and resilience?
I think I just answered that in so many ways. Uh, yeah, uh, the ability to reframe your role as a leader, and then learn the skills. I mean, there are some skills you do have to learn to be able to move into this new role of leadership. Uh, but it takes all the tension and pressure off of you of having to be the one with all the answers all the time to situations that are unpredictable, uncertain, constantly changing. Um, it's I actually read a study recently. I think it was done in 2002 or three, something like that. The first study that I've ever read where they measured the way leaders are feeling, and the summary of the study was leaders are increasingly uh, emotionally exhausted at the end of the day and feeling extremely frustrated, and it's only getting worse. And it's because of what we ask of them. It's just inhuman. Um, Leaders should be, and so the term that we've often heard, servant leadership, which is a very Jesus Christ-like orientation to what leadership is all about, is really the role we have to move into. But I mean, I think even Christ said it, to be a servant to others is a great sacrifice. And basically, what you're doing is sacrificing your ego to something greater than yourself. And that's very difficult for a lot of people.
It is. So I'm going to ask you my favorite question, Norman, and that is, what do you want your legacy to be?
Wow. Um, that I set the world on a path to transforming the paradigm of business.
I love it.
If we don't do that, we continually have environments where people are contained into less mature positions, an environment where they're constantly dependent on others for the sense of self and identity and sense of contribution. And I see our paradigm as the living organization as an opportunity to not only help organizations become more effective at creating the results they want, but in doing so, the byproduct of that is we develop the maturity of our society, which will only benefit everybody.
That's good. So on this season, we have a new thing now, a surprise question. Pick a number between 1 and 10 for your surprise question.
7.
All right, here we go. Would you rather have unlimited sushi for life or unlimited tacos for life?
Wow, that's tough. Two of my favorite dishes. My intuition tells me sushi. I'm not sure why. If you're going to ask me why did I pick that over tacos, I have absolutely no idea. Um, but there's something about sushi, maybe the way it's done with a certain sense of sacredness
Mm.
that comes to mind. I mean, a lot of the way Japanese prepare their food is ritualistic. There's a sacredness to the food that is so maybe that's why I relate to sushi. So yes, sushi, sacredness.
There you go. I like that. So, Norman, where can people find you, connect
Uh,
with you, and buy your book?
the book is on Amazon. So the Living Organization, Transforming Business uh, to Create Extraordinary Results is on Amazon. So you can just look it up. You can find me on my website, quantumleaders.com. You can reach me at NWOLFE at quantumleaders.com. And I'm on LinkedIn, Norman Wolf on LinkedIn. So those are probably the best places. Probably the best place is via email if they want to reach me personally, and NWOLFE at quantumleaders.com. I'll also like to take this opportunity to say that the second book of the Living Organization trilogy is at the printers and will be out sometime May, June timeframe. And it's called Leading the Living Organization. So it's all about the leadership skills that leaders will need to do this. I'm very excited about that. And actually, if people want a free copy of the first book, they can go to thelivingorganization.com/book one.
Well, Norman, thanks so much for sharing your wisdom and for inviting us to see organizations and leadership in a completely new way. The Living Organizational offers a transformative blueprint for anyone who wants to build companies that grow sustainability, honor the human spirit, and unlock extraordinary results. To my listeners, if you're a leader, an entrepreneur, or simply someone who knows there must be a better way to build and to lead, you need to read this book. Check out the show notes for Norm's links, quantum leaders, and resources to dive deeper into living organizational net framework. If today's conversation sparked a new thought or challenged your assumptions, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who's ready to rethink what leadership can be. Until next time, keep building bridges, keep becoming the version of yourself that God created you to be. And Norm, thanks so much for providing such amazing content to my audience.
Keith, it's really been a pleasure. Your questions were fascinating, and I'm glad I had an opportunity to reach out to your audience. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much, Norm.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Trailblazers and Titans. If you enjoyed our conversation and found value in the insights shared, please subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and continue bringing you the stories of the world's most inspiring leaders. Don't forget to follow us on social media for updates and exclusive content. Join our community of Trailblazers and Titans, and let's continue to learn, grow, and transform our visions into reality together. Until next time, keep blazing your trail and striving for greatness.